So welcome and thank you for taking the time to be here this evening. It really is so lovely to see your faces, some familiar and some new. And I'm conscious, as we just shared, that there's a range of people here today, from experienced coaches to those of you that are still in the training room, some of you that are in the training room with myself, which, by the way, I'm honoured that you're also here to continue to hear my voice, because I know you hear a lot of it in training. So thank you so much for taking the time to be here this evening. And also for those of you that are new to coaching and interested in coaching and exploring options, I welcome you all as we dive into the topic of building an international coaching practice. But before we do, I would love to introduce myself. So my name is Nisha. I am a transformative coach with a passion for helping corporate executives and leaders and high achievers lead authentically and to unlock their full potential. So prior to becoming a coach, I've had the privilege of working on major projects within the world of football, including Club Wembley, on behalf of the FA, the London 2012 Olympics with FIFA, and then I went on to work with Tottenham Hotspur Football Club. While it was a dream career, it came with its own challenges, and I can put my hands up and admit that I've been on both sides of the fence of a terrible leader and a better one, which I absolutely learned through my own coaching and development. And although I had what some people would describe as a dream career, I struggled to strike the work-life balance, and I began to feel like my identity was solely defined by my job. And so after over a decade of dealing with the additional pressures and struggles associated with being with a woman, but also a brown woman within the football industry, I began suffering from a mild burnout, and I do call it mild burnout. I realized that there are extreme levels of this, and realized that something drastic needed to shift in my life. And so I took myself on my own personal development journey, and that is when I experienced the profound impact of coaching firsthand, and it really drove a desire in me to make a difference in other people's lives too, especially within leaders working within the world of corporate sport and in the corporate world in general. I saw such a gap in how we lead and support our teams. And especially as a leader of a team, I just knew that there was more that we could do to maximize the potential of the people that we lead or work with. And also, in addition to that, my quest for work-life balance and finding my identity beyond my job became essential, because my health was at an all-time low. And it's something that I still work on to this day. So in 2018, I took a leap of faith and transitioned into personal development and coaching, combining my business knowledge and my experience with coaching. And over the past 5 years, I've fully qualified and established a thriving coaching business. I'm also a trainer for Animas, which is one of the best coach training schools in Europe. I've not been paid to say that, I can promise you. And I blend my corporate expertise with my passion for coaching, working with diverse clients as well, which we'll absolutely dive into. And I deliver workshops and group coaching programs. And in addition to working with a number of fantastic private clients and organisations, I'm also an affiliate coach for a company called Women in Football, and they aim to improve women's representation at all levels of the game by challenging discrimination and lobbying for change in the sports industry. So I work with a lot of the corporate members for Women in Football, delivering coaching and group workshops. I'm also an affiliate coach for a company called Ivy House, a fantastic company where we develop the kind of leaders people actually want to follow, the pioneers of this world. So again, I'm a performance coach in that space. And I'm also an affiliate coach for Better Up, which is a global leader in the affiliate coaching space. I've reduced the amount of time I spend there, but it's definitely something that I still do in order for me to continue to diversify my coaching practice. But they have over 3,000 coaches working across some of the biggest companies in the world. And so over the past 5 years, I've been fortunate enough to work with clients from from America, Europe, Asia, the Middle East, Australia, New Zealand. I've also travelled abroad to deliver coaching and workshops, most recently in Ireland. It was my first time in Ireland as well. I absolutely loved it, and the culture and the people. And I also had the honour of being in Switzerland as well recently, working with a culturally diverse group for a leadership graduate programme. That was with Ivy House as well. So I love traveling, and was fortunate enough to also spend some time in Mexico and Thailand, and the USA, touching on the digital nomad lifestyle, still dipping my toe into that, but it was really nice to be able to again connect to my core value of freedom and travel whilst working as a coach. So my true passion lies in helping, as I say, individuals, regardless of their background, achieve personal and professional growth and success. And what drives me is the belief that everyone has the potential to be the best version of themselves, and with the freedom to live a life that motivates and inspires them in every area. Something I don't often share is my cultural background, but given today's topic, I thought it'd be a great opportunity to share a little bit about the influences that have shaped my life. So a bit of history about my cultural background. I was born on a council estate in East London in the 80s, and I have two brothers, and we had an Alsatian, growing up, we had an Alsatian called Simba, long before Disney made The Lion King. My parents are Ugandan born Indians, hence our dog being called Simba. And in 1972, Idi Amin gave my family and my grandparents 90 days to leave Uganda with just one bag, and leaving behind their homes and businesses and possessions, to leave. And so my mum and her family ended up on the German side of Switzerland, and my dad came to the UK with his family. And a year later, armed with a map and his brother's car, my dad drove all the way through France to Switzerland to ask for my mum's hand in marriage. My granddad said no, but they didn't listen, and my mum came to the UK. And just give you a little bit more background, the reason why my granddad initially said no was because one of the biggest challenges my parents faced was that my dad is of a Hindu faith and my mum a Muslim, which to this day is controversial. And so growing up, I had a lovely childhood with a really close-knit family and many memorable trips to beautiful Switzerland to visit a very large and loving family. And unlike my Indian friends, our home was filled with African culture and artifacts. And to this day, my parents are very much more African than Indian. And the blend of cultures and religion to some degree was beautiful. And I noticed from a very young age how easy it was for me to adapt into other cultures and religious settings. A lot of my parents' friends were from the Sikh community. So whether I was in a temple or a mosque or a gurdwara, you know, they were all familiar to me. But I was unaware of the impact that the conflicting cultures would have on my life too. So on the flip side, I spent a lot of my younger years masking and trying to fit into both cultures and feel accepted. I also referred to myself as half and half for a lot of my life. And it took me many years and a fantastic coach to recognize myself as whole. And I still navigate my beliefs around belonging, with balancing both Eastern and Western cultural expectations. So that's just a little peep into my world, and it's lovely to see such a culturally diverse group here today as well. So thank you for sharing where you are in the world. So we're here to talk about building an international coaching practice, the pros and cons. However, the foundations of what we'll be looking at today is building our cultural intelligence. And so have I got a slide for this? I have, yes. So some experts argue that cultural intelligence is such an important predictor of success in the workplace. It's right there with cognitive intelligence, IQ, and emotional intelligence, EQ. So for this reason, cultural intelligence is often referred to as cultural quotient, or CQ, reflecting its importance alongside EQ and IQ. So essentially, this is the skill to relate and work effectively in culturally diverse situations. I really want to share, though, that today's talk is based on my own thoughts. I am not an expert in diversity and inclusion. This is my experience and perspective, but there are other intersections. And I'm aware that there are so many avenues that we can explore in relation to the topics that I'm going to touch on. But this is going to hopefully provide a bit of a catalyst to your own thinking and your own interests. So I invite you to notice what might come up for you as we go through this, but also keep a note of any topics or any areas that pique your interest, so that you can continue to explore this for yourself outside of this talk, just as much as I will continue to develop my learning outside of here too. Also, I'm a transformative coach trained by Animas, so my approach is deeply person-centered, which might be different to some of the approaches that you take here as well. So just notice that also as I go through this talk. Themes of that will show up today. When I initially agreed to speak, I thought I'd be in a room with maybe 15 people who were training to be coaches. I was more than surprised to hear how many people had signed up to this course. I know that this conversation, I know we've currently got over 100 people in the room from different backgrounds and levels of experience. So thank you. I'm really thankful that I get to share my passion with a wider audience. I'll do my best not to use coaching jargon, but thank you so much for being here. At the end of this hour, we'll have a short time for some Q&A as well. So please feel free to park any questions until then, and I'll do my best to take some of those questions and answer them. Okay. So today, as I say, I'm excited to share how I'm developing an international coaching practice and also developing cultural intelligence along the way. And while many aspects of human behavior and thought are universal, cultural elements actually lead to surprising differences in how we think and feel and act. So what I'd love for you to take away, especially for those of you that are still developing your coaching business, is how can you expand your practice with the world of opportunities that are now available on a global scale, or even attainable on a global scale, but also how can we help ourselves as coaches and our clients to become more aware of cross-cultural complexities. As coaches, how can we navigate unconscious bias and create an inclusive environment? And also, how might we develop both our emotional intelligence and our cultural intelligence, appreciating cultural diversity, making a difference without thinking our way is necessarily the right way. As someone who was born and raised in England, I'm conscious that my paradigm and my view of the world influences my coaching approach. But I try to be mindful that my Western way of thinking or looking at the world isn't the only way. So I invite you to just have a think about what might be coming up for you as I say that. And finally, we'll also look at how you can start to build an international coaching practice that allows you to work with clients from around the world. So expanding your client base and reach. I'll cover off just some of the practical elements of this and sharing my thoughts again into this space. So again, I really appreciate your time, and hopefully you will find this useful. I'm also going to just touch on this question that comes up a lot in the coach training space, which is to niche or not to niche. Often I meet coaches who feel stuck or limited by a niche, or fearful of moving forward because they don't have a defined niche. And whilst I agree that building a niche is important and can help you to focus on your ideal clients, there's also value in holding your niche lightly. And what I mean by that is, how might you give yourself permission to explore and learn and develop your coaching in ways that may sit outside of your desired niche? Or in what ways could you expand elements of your niche to create a more diverse practice? This is actually something I'm seeing more and more of in the coaching world. Lots of coaches are broadening their horizons and the spaces that they work in. Personally, by me giving myself the opportunity to build a diverse portfolio of clients, it's had a huge impact, not only on me, but my growth as a coach. especially building hours for my ICF credential, but also the opportunity to meet fascinating personalities and learn from people from across the world and make a difference in their lives too. But I also believe that by holding my niche lightly and diversifying my practice, it's helped me to develop my niche in an organic way. I don't believe that I could have achieved I don't believe that I could have achieved what I have within my niche if I had just focused everything on one niche, if I'd put all of my eggs in one basket from the very beginning. I believe that the opportunities that have now 5 years on opened up for me in my niche, which is working with leaders in football, has opened up due to my skills experience that I've built up working outside of that space. So I'm hoping that the tips I share with you today will help you to start thinking about broadening your clientele if it's something that you haven't started to do already. Okay, so let's start by looking at cultural intelligence. I've mentioned the word cultural intelligence, but what is it? So cultural intelligence refers to our ability to understand, adapt to, and work effectively with people from different cultural backgrounds. It's not just about being aware of different cultures. It involves the capability to be able to navigate and function in diverse cultural settings. So as it said on the screen earlier, experts argue that cultural intelligence is one of the most important predictors for workplace success, or for success in general in our conversations and relationships. And so the 4 key components that you might want to look at in order to develop this is cultural knowledge. So having an understanding of the customs, traditions, values, norms of different cultures. What might you learn about the history, the language, other aspects that shape a particular culture, just strengthening our knowledge of those cultures there. We've got understanding. So again, as a coach, how might I develop that cultural understanding? How might I develop empathy with people from different cultural backgrounds? How might I, appreciate their perspectives and their worldviews? How might I notice that there are actually multiple valid ways of seeing and doing things, not just, again, my approach, my worldview? We have cultural adaptability. So how might I adjust my behavior and communication style to fit the cultural context? But how can I be flexible and open to change in order to be effective in diverse environments? And I say this with recognition that we don't want to adapt to the point where it becomes inauthentic. So how might I do this in a way that's authentic? Especially in the one-to-one space, I've had to adapt my coaching approach on numerous occasions. And the only way I can describe it is that sometimes I just have to shift gears in the space. That's what it feels like. I may have to move at a different pace to what I might be used to when I'm working with international clients. And so that leads me on to cultural motivation as well. What's important to me about this? Do I have a desire or a willingness or even enthusiasm to engage with people from different cultures? And do I value diversity and inclusion? Or, am I actively seeking opportunities to learn and interact with individuals from diverse backgrounds? And again, is that from a place of authenticity? What are my motivations for this? So I invite you to reflect on these as we continue on in this talk. I'm so used to inviting conversation into, so I'm going to pause every now and then, realizing that I need to continue talking. So contracting. So where do we begin? Let's start with contracting for success. Bear with me one moment. Okay. So when working across cultures, developing a shared understanding between the coach and client about what will happen in the coaching process and how that interaction will take place is key. So contracting is possibly the most important first discussion you will have in any coaching relationship, as this is where boundaries in coaching are going to be established, and those mutual expectations for you and your client are going to be set. And so for me, I personally like to take time to explore someone's understanding of coaching before explaining the coaching process or how I work. And interestingly, I found that when I'm working internationally, there have often been some expectations that the coaching process will be combined with mentoring and advice giving. And so, not always, but sometimes. And so I remember working with a lady who was based in Asia, and I'll share more about this client later, but early on, she said, right, so my understanding is you're going to give me advice, you're going to tell me what to do, and I'm here to learn from you. And that was my opportunity to talk about the coaching process, what it is, and how I work, and just creating that level understanding in the space. And she seemed to be very happy with the approach of working in partnership, helping her to explore her thoughts through listening and questioning. But up until this point, her experience of coaching had been limited to mentors at work. And actually, the coaching approach wasn't familiar. And it was something new that they were introducing in the space by working with coaches. So also from a cultural perspective, there may be a few other areas for consideration, like expectations, which we'll go through in this talk. I recognize that there's so much we can do in the space of contracting. So I'm not going to go through that in deep fine-tooth comb, but this will be dependent on you and who you work with and how you work. So just bear that in mind as we go through this. There may be elements that you think, okay, that might be something I would introduce into my contracting process. And as the coaching industry grows on a global scale, and thanks to the increase of virtual platforms and global accessibility through affiliate companies, we are more likely now to work with people across the globe, which is fantastic. But creating that level understanding from the outset is key. And there's also a number of practical elements and logistics we want to consider, and I'll touch on some of these a little later. But this visual that I'm about to share with you is of the growth of the coaching market across the world in 2023. Coaching is growing at a very fast rate on a global scale. So here on this map that map in front of you is a 2023 global study. This is the number of coaches that have grown throughout the world, but I think it's also a great representation of the demand for coaching too on an international scale. The number of coach practitioners grew in all regions, most notably in Asia, the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean. So I hear a lot of coaches going, it just feels like there's every day there's coaches popping up everywhere. And I agree that it is, there is definitely a high rate of growth here, but I do also believe that we can take this as reassurance that there's also a higher demand now for coaching. So moving on from that, rapport as well. So rapport is the foundation of meaningful coaching relationships, and good rapport can make the other person feel respected, heard, and seen. And contracting is also the first step to us developing rapport with our clients. As many of you know, there is very little that we can achieve in the coaching space without rapport. So in essence, this is creating the psychological safety. How can I create an environment where my client feels psychologically safe to open up and trust me? And also, how can I as a coach develop rapport and understanding of my clients? So I'm going to be very honest here. When I first started to develop an interest in cultural coaching or culture in coaching, I got a bit ahead of myself. And I have to catch myself sometimes. I thought that by developing a keen interest in someone's culture, it would help me to build rapport, and that they'd want to share this with me, and it was all going to be great. And I remember going into a first session when someone mentioned that they grew up in Argentina and then went on to talk about their personal challenges. And I was keen to explore the connection between her culture and the challenges, and it really didn't help. It created what felt like some defensiveness from my client. Personally, I recognized that I was too early in the process for that level of curiosity specifically, and it was driven by my curiosity rather than being with my client. This was when I really understood the importance of building rapport, meeting your client where they're at, taking my time with cultural exploration, and holding back on some of my cultural curiosity. We didn't have that level of rapport yet, and the client might not have felt seen or heard and that there was, I may have created a bit of a disconnect over my overly eager curiosity, and it actually sent me out of my usual coaching approach. I noticed that I wasn't being my normal self in the space. So it's important to remember that everyone is unique. And it's important to recognize the human being in front of you for who they are at their core. Can I just check that you guys can still hear me and see me okay? Because I felt like it froze. Okay, brilliant. So it's important to recognize the person in front of you for who they are at their core first and foremost. We're going to touch on themes here, but I want us to recognize what I'm not saying is here's what you focus on, but here's what we might develop some lenses on. So as coaches, we can absolutely recognize that the person in front of us is made up of a collective of their beliefs and their values, which are influenced by their environment or their upbringing and their culture. But meet your client where they're at and give yourself time and space to develop an understanding of the human in front of you. We're complex, unique beings, and cultural elements can feel very personal. No matter how much I might identify with the culture, our experiences are very different. And we also live in a world where many cultures and races are blended and intertwined with religion. So saying this, as a coach, how can we develop an environment where diverse perspectives from different cultures, insights become useful and informative in the coaching space? But there may be elements that we want to set up from the outset by acknowledging cultural differences, for example, and contracting with the coachee to use those as sources of information and exploration. So, for example, your client might bring cultural elements into the first session. I've worked with a few clients where it was really important for them that I understood some of their cultural challenges right from the outset, because this is what was important to them. Okay. However, it can be helpful to also reflect on and have an understanding of our cultural differences as a coach, and how could that play out in the coaching relationship. I've recently started working with two clients from India, and whilst I may be of Indian culture, I'm aware that our cultural differences might play out. I may already have created some assumptions or biases based on what I believe to be true. So it's important for me to be mindful of this and do my best to put those assumptions aside as I enter into sessions with these clients. As the coach, it's your responsibility to manage your own state. And so that whatever's going on for you in terms of your responses to the coachee, this doesn't get in the way of them achieving what they want. So try to have a sufficient level of self-awareness around your own cultural awareness, cultural issues, whatever it is. And remember that the coachee will always be the expert of their own culture, not you. So it's perfectly okay for you to ask questions when relevant. It's then the coach's job, our job, to help our clients to make the connection between what they want from coaching and those and how those cultural aspects might need to be accommodated in some way. Yeah. So give yourself time to develop an understanding as well. Have patience with yourself and your clients. When we have rapport with our clients, this is so much easier to explore, easier to work in any level with our clients. But I'll share a funny story about building rapport with one of my clients. So in 2021, I had one of the most interesting clients, and I went above and beyond to build rapport with this client. So I was working with a Serbian client who was very proud of his culture. And this was the first and only client so far that was adamant that I took time to understand his culture. He often spoke about the history of his people and the beauty of his country. And I think he even gave me a history lesson once. And this was how we built rapport. I leaned into this often, and then we would somehow tie it back to the themes of coaching and his leadership style. But sometimes it wouldn't. And I could see that for my client, he was keen for me to understand him at his essence, and that was through his culture. And one of my clients' favorite pastimes was to take weekend trips into the mountains and go hiking. and he would speak passionately about this Serbian, like he'd go hiking, and a lot of these trips would involve him having this national drink called rakia. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's a double distilled fruit brandy, and he'd talk about the importance of sipping on it very slowly, and it's super strong. And once he said to me, Nisha, you must try this drink. And so, not wanting to let my client down, that's the excuse I'm using, I went on a mission to find this rakia and give it a try. And luckily my friend is married to a lovely Serbian lady, so I arranged to meet them for lunch, to learn more about the culture, have some Serbian food, and of course a little sip of rakia. And in our next session, I told my client about my afternoon with my Serbian friends, and it won me so many brownie points. It transformed our relationship. He was so delighted that I'd taken the time to get to know his culture and sample his national drink. And after this, you know, my client opened up in ways that I didn't expect. He was willing to be vulnerable, share challenges, and I genuinely feel that could have only been built through the trust and respect, that mutual trust and respect through understanding his culture. So in summary, when building rapport, creating an environment that's non-judgmental, being aware of your biases, and being open to learning is definitely a step in the right direction. Immerse yourself into the space, but also reflect. Take time to reflect on what showed up for you in that session. What judgments might have you be making, or what assumptions might you be making? And develop patience with people and situations that are unfamiliar, and also patience with yourself as well. Approaching an unfamiliar situation with curiosity rather than judgment is going to be the key thing that stops you from jumping to assumptions and supports you to be able to watch when your biases kick in. So navigating bias, I'm just going to touch on that, and I hope you guys don't mind me still having my screen up. I'm conscious that I've had my screen up for a while. Actually, no, saying that, I think I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a second so I can see you all. So everyone has unconscious bias, like we all do, and bias is created through messages introduced into our subconscious from an early age. And it's based on our environment and upbringing. And so what ends up happening is we harbor certain biases based on our view of the world. And this is often hardwired for our own safety and survival. So to give you an example of this for me is, I remember at a young age, I was given a doll. For the very first time, I was given a little brown doll to play with. And I refused to play with it. You know, I was raised in an environment where all my dolls were white. All the dolls that I ever saw were white. And so despite that doll representing me, it was unfamiliar to me, and it wasn't what I was used to. So notice that there was that bias that I had created, and so biases unintentionally influence how we act towards one another. And often they exist beyond the conscious level. And at first, we really just need to acknowledge that bias exists. And then by noticing a bias, it doesn't mean that we own that view. It's just noticing it. It's okay for you to then explore this further. Because with awareness, those biases can start to be mitigated. We can start to work with it, okay? So I'm just going to share a couple of steps that may be helpful for you to explore. Oh, sorry, bear with me one moment. Okay, this is why I need to keep my screen up. There we go. Okay, so sharing, there we go. Can you all see my screen? So navigating, okay, in its simplest form, label it, name it, okay? So awareness, you know, I recognize I make assumptions, for example, about tall people. Whenever I see a really tall man, I think he must be great at basketball. He'd make an excellent basketball player. That's me kind of naming it, okay? And so reflecting and understanding, noticing, so where is that coming from, Nisha? Okay, I might make these assumptions based on X, you know, here's why this might happen. So for this particular example, often people who are really good at basketball are very tall. That might be why I am thinking that way. So what else is possible here? If I'm to substitute, reframe this, you know, how might that actually be wrong? So if I was to really look into this now, I have a friend who's very tall. I have friends who are very tall, and they're not necessarily great at playing basketball or sport. And so I can look for counter evidence. Okay, what evidence do I have of the opposite? So being open to possibilities, but also creating and recognizing other elements. So for example, I have a friend who's very tall, but he's an excellent musician. So opening up my mind to what else could be possible for people who are tall. But also I have another friend, and this is genuine. I've got a friend who I went to school with, and he has had a really successful career in basketball, but he's not very tall. So it's a real life example for me of going, that is a great counter evidence there. So challenge your mind to see things from a broader perspective. Okay, in essence, this is what we will happen. So just name it, reflect, you know, and substitute and counter. These are the steps that we can take to support us. Elements that are out of our awareness. So those of you that have trained in the Animas space will recognize this next slide, but this because we use this in one of our modules. But many elements within culture operate out of our awareness. So there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods at them and says, "Morning, boys, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the hell is water?" And so there's so much we can dive into with this and notice what's coming up for you. But when working with our clients, there might be multiple elements at play that are out of their awareness, especially from a cultural perspective. Beliefs and values, needs, assumptions, behaviors, all of this, judgments, comparisons, both for the coach and the client. And so as a coach, I'm just going to talk through some examples of challenges our clients might experience that are potentially out of their awareness. So how your client experiences or expresses their emotions. Are there cultural elements at play around displaying emotions? What is our level of comfort with even talking about and acknowledging emotions? Where might that stem from? So that's just one element to look out for. There's also communication and language, dealing with authority, for example. How might their cultural beliefs or societal expectations have them communicate or respond to people in positions of authority? There's a book called Breaking the Bamboo Ceiling. Some of you may have heard of it. Which talks about Asian Americans being the largest percentage of college graduates to enter the workforce, but many of them don't actually make it to what they describe as the corner offices. And it talks about how Eastern cultural values can be at odds with Western cultural values in the workplace, and how it may be limiting their progress or their ability to enter places like the boardroom. So how do we show up? How do we present or even feel about sharing our successes, especially in the workplace? And this can show up in our communication style. Belief systems. So how might upbringing and their home environment or expectations, for example, on education, impact variables such as our achievement, how we feel about achievement, what is achievement, self-esteem. Sometimes in certain parts of the world, cultural expectations can create an immense pressure to succeed academically and professionally. I've worked with a number of clients that have spent years feeling unfulfilled in careers because they followed a career path that they felt was expected of them, or certain career options just were not considered at all. So what might be at play with some of those decisions, lifelong decisions people have made? Saying that, I recently attended an amateur boxing match, and I was delighted to see that there was a young Asian female boxer. It was refreshing to see a better representation for diversity in sports for females, but many of them, I realized, would have consciously stepped outside of cultural norms in order to achieve that. And her family were there as well, and it was just it was really refreshing to see this being embraced in Asian culture, so something that I was not familiar with. Also, stereotype. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see you all again. Also, things like stereotypes and microaggressions, systemic issues, and the impacts that this might have. I was working with a young Latino client. She lives in New York, and she landed her dream job at a leading global tech firm, and she would often refer to the stereotype of Latino women being maids and housekeepers, and she felt this sense of duty to be a role model to young Latino women, and she felt the weight of this stereotype growing up, along with microaggressions, so towards her race. And so the company had specifically set up coaching for their ERG groups, as an ERG is an employee resource group, and she was a part of the Latinx ERG, and one particular event that stood out to her in the years that she graduated was there was an incident where Kelly Osbourne made a derogatory comment, apparently didn't mean to, but made a derogatory comment about Latinos on an American talk show. And it was stereotypes like this that impacted my client's self-esteem. So these were themes that would play out in her as she was progressing as a leader, just in recognition of those stereotypes and the microaggressions that she felt were still in the system around her. To bring that to myself, growing up, my family ran 3 newsagents in central London, and in school we would be mocked at school for being Asian and running corner shops. There was a joke that used to run in my school, which was like, why do Asians not play football? Oh, because every time they get a corner they build a shop. Like, it was just this running joke, and I used to be embarrassed about my family having shops. And I look back now with so much pride, for my dad and his brothers who came here and built a life. They worked hard, they built businesses, that's they were entrepreneurs, and because of them, I am who I am. And it's interesting actually, because I wonder what other elements were at play for me based on that shame around the stereotypes I felt growing up. And it's funny, actually, I was thinking earlier, when do I slot this in? But it's interesting because when I used to go to the shop as well on weekends, my dad, everyone used to call my dad Brian. So my dad had adapted to his cultural environment and changed his. So my dad's name is Pravin, but when he was running this shop, I think someone suggested, let's just call you Brian. And every day, it was like, morning, Brian, how are you, Brian? And for 30 years, my dad went by the name Brian. He doesn't go by that name anymore. And interestingly, a lot of his colleagues and friends respect his name. His name's Pravin. They can say it, but it just goes to show you how times have changed with that. So I did, again, as I say, I wonder what other elements were at play with me based on that shame around stereotypes I felt growing up, and our clients as well. And so it's important to develop cultural empathy and be aware of challenges that we may still face in day-to-day interactions at home and at work. Also, cultural norms can have a powerful effect. So this is where we might see a conflict, for example, with authenticity, judgment, comparison, acceptance, belonging, shame and guilt around life decisions. So whether you decide to get married, for example, and have children, I know many people in my culture that have never thought twice about whether marriage was something that was truly desired. It was an expectation, you get married, you have children, and those of us that don't, well, that's a problem. And so, I'd like to say I'm the leader of my own life, but I have to be honest and ask myself, do I really have full autonomy in every decision I make, without thinking about my cultural responsibility? Also, topics of depression and coaching and mental health. In some cultures, depression and mental health can be considered taboo. I remember a client saying to me that she wouldn't want anyone to know in her family to know that she had a coach, because she was fearful of being judged or frowned upon. And it was helpful to explore this with my client as well, so that she could feel at ease within the space. I could go on, but values as well, core values and values that might be out of alignment So, you know, things like the first generation of immigrant parents, for example, they might have had responsibilities for taking care of things from a very young age. So recently I was working with a client who felt very obligated to put his parents' needs before his own, blamed himself for their problems, worried constantly about them, and felt quite responsible for their life experiences, and he would neglect his own needs. And part of him also wanted to rescue and help his parents, but in our sessions, the theme of resentment would show up a fair bit. So lots of this was operating outside of his awareness, and we were able to help him connect to some of those elements around his values, his personal values, as well as those cultural ones as well. I could talk a lot about that, the alignment of values, but I'm conscious of the time here as well. But this links to establishing healthy boundaries as well. So I was working with a client who said it's her duty to look after her elders. She wouldn't have it any other way. But also taking care of her children and having a successful career. She hasn't ever considered what boundaries would look like or self-care. But actually she really values family and embraces her responsibility. So yes, there was elements for us to work on, you know, around her boundaries, but also for me to respect her values as well. So this is just a snippet of some of the themes that can appear, and it's useful to explore these elements that are operating outside of our clients' awareness with a cultural lens, and how might some of these connect together, but also reflecting on our own narrative in the space too. Okay, so some of the things that we may want to consider to create a more inclusive environment, as a coach, and as a group coach, or even a facilitator. I'm just going to share my screen again, bear with me. Are these elements here. So curiosity, you know, I'm gonna just bring these to life so you can see the words on the screen around curiosity, quality, humility, perseverance, adaptability, you know, reflection. But it's just to give some live examples. So effective communication is going to be vital for successful client relationships, and communication can be a little bit more complex when working with international clients. In addition to contracting for success and developing that psychological safety, we want to consider things like language barriers, accents, different communication styles. There might be misinterpretations or misunderstandings, and it's essential to remain mindful of cultural differences and expectations in the space. We might overcomplicate language. We might use phrases that are not globally recognized. So, you know, we use a lot of metaphor in our daily language, which doesn't always make sense to people around the world. So how might we simplify some of our language? Also being aware of our biases when it comes to language. So for example, when you're working in groups, are you leaning towards people that you feel are articulate? And what do we mean by articulate? Are we referring to well-polished English, for example? Are we making judgments on people based on their accents and dialects? Because more often than not, the most incredible minds in the room are those with an accent, because they know more than one language. So again, just being mindful of those things, like how can we encourage and support everyone in the room for their voices to be heard? How do we create those psychological safe spaces? Also, stay curious of making assumptions, like what are some of the limitations that some of your assumptions might be creating? For example, I was speaking to a coach recently who was working with a Chinese client, and she said that she wouldn't challenge him initially because she was told that Chinese people are known to save face and don't like to be challenged because it causes embarrassment. And with this particular client, it couldn't have been further from the truth. So so this coach was able to own this, name it in the space, and the client requested for her to be more challenging. And so just noticing like what might come up, and it's okay, but we can name that, but not making assumptions. Stay curious, regardless of what we might think is right or what we might think we know. But saying that, it is good practice to understand and develop cultural sensitivity to or sensitivity to like certain norms and styles as well. It can help build relationships to and avoid misunderstandings as well. So investing time in cultural research and actively engaging in learning can really help bridge some of those gaps as well. Again, when we're being mindful of assumptions, not using blanket statements, even, I know this sounds obvious, but even if it's meant with the best intention, like all Americans are like this or all Eastern Europeans are like that, can really cause offense, even if it's done with the best intention. So, you know, I'm leaning into recognizing some of the assumptions that we might make in this space. The other thing that I want to highlight as well is something like rescuing. So I know I'm using coaching terminology here, but for those of you that are familiar, if you think of transactional analysis and the drama triangle, I say this because I really had to watch for this when I was working with international clients. There was a particular client in the Philippines. Her English was limited. She would often work late at night. She had a lot of family responsibilities. Her Wi-Fi was often temperamental, and it would make me feel like I really need to do more to help my client. And I noticed that whenever I went into that space, it was a hindrance in the coaching, because before I knew it, I started to lead and give advice, and I'm trying to save here. So when we try to rescue clients, it's disempowering. And so reflective practice is key. It was through my own reflections that I was able to become consciously aware of that and then start to step back from doing that in the space. And I have to say, it was, again, just transformative when I was able to partner with my client as equal and not do the rescuing, parenting, whatever it was that I was trying to do in the space, because it can often leave both you as the coach and the client quite frustrated. There's so many more that I want to talk through, but I'm just going to say, remember that everyone is unique. And whilst we may have cultural understanding or curiosity, it's just important to stay open without judgment. But most of all, be kind to yourself as a coach as well. Like, you're trying your best. You can't get everything right. You might make some mistakes, and that's okay. Just own it and use them to learn and grow. Keep reflecting post-session, but diversifying your client portfolio is going to provide you a really valuable opportunity to enhance your adaptability, your flexibility, while you practice communicating in different ways with your clients. And if ever in doubt, just go seek supervision. Animas has a sister school called the ICCS, the International Centre for Coaching Supervision, and there are numerous supervisors out there that can support you with any coaching challenges you might face outside of this space. I'm just going to touch on a few practical elements, and I'm conscious of time. So things like timings. When you're working with international clients, typically it often means dealing with different time zone differences as well. So have a think about that. Like, be mindful of maybe opening up your calendar or your diary to offer some flexibility here for people in different time zones as well. But be mindful when you're traveling of your time and how that might overlap. I recently traveled to Thailand, and I ended up working past midnight because I didn't think about my time zones and my different clients, and I don't recommend coaching at midnight ever. Also, your diaries, think about that. Not every country operates on a Monday to Friday basis. So in the Middle East, for example, working a Sunday to Thursday is the working week. So take things like that into consideration. Scheduling tools like Calendly really help take a lot of the headache away from that. Also, locations, like where are you going to coach from? Zoom is a platform that I love using internationally. It works really well in every country. And also, sometimes if I have got clients that have trouble connecting with internet, I'm happy to switch camera off and run an audio session sometimes. So just having some flexibility about location and how you work can be really helpful. And to effectively reach international clients, it can be helpful to establish yourself on different platforms for ease of communication. So maybe think about that. There might be a particular part in the world that uses a particular platform that could be helpful. Also, there's translation tools that can be helpful to use. I recently used a translation tool when I was working with a client. We were looking at her 360. Some of the feedback was in Italian, and it was just lovely to you can take a picture now of that, and it uploads onto Google, and it translates for you. So there's some really clever translation tools, and also thinking about payments and fees as well. Like, will you offer different currencies? If yes, work out your rates. Be clear on your pricing. I've been caught out a few times when I've agreed to work in dollars. Work out the exchange rates, things like that. And also, how will you take payment? So what different apps might you use? For example, PayPal and Starling and Revolut are apps that are usually a little bit more user-friendly from an international level. And there's also other platforms, I think Wise and Bill.com, that again just makes international payments a little bit easier. So explore your options there. And also rules and regulations. So working with international companies in person, for example, might involve certain legal requirements, tax implications. So familiarize yourself with regulations, both in your country and the client's country if needed. Obviously, if it's virtual, a lot of that is okay. If you're traveling outside of the UK or wherever, think about visas and permits as well. But also data protection. So what are some of the laws you might want to look into? What are the GDPR or the data protection laws? And also, do you have a relevant insurance as well that protects you from work or supports you to be able to work with people from around the world? So just double check things like that. I know I had to go back and change my insurance so that I could work with people internationally. Just going to quickly touch on this. So getting started. There's so many different ways that you can engage with international clients and allow yourself to explore new markets, tap into different regions. Often there's a lot less competition when we are broadening our horizons here. So affiliate platforms, for example, is one of the best ways to get moving. They automatically connect you to clients all over the world. When I first started out, for example, when I was working with BetterUp, it was instrumental in developing my skills and experience in working with a diverse portfolio. And the affiliate coaching platforms are growing. There's so many more out there now. And so again, do your research, look outside, but there's multiple benefits like building your coaching skills and hours. For some of them, you do need ICF credentialing, but not all. Partnering with leadership and training companies. Many are often looking for coaches, so you could join some of their networks. You might do some internal coaching within your organization. And if it's a global organization, maybe supporting colleagues in international offices, connecting with other coaches. I completed a conscious business course recently, and I met some fantastic ICF coaches. We kept in touch, and recently 10 of us got together to support a leadership program. So you never know what opportunities could come from your networks. So, attending things like maybe ICF member networking events could be, or even Animas networking events, whatever it is, just keeping that network alive. Volunteering for social impact causes. So if you find that it's still limited for you, maybe there's opportunities through charities and social impact. And I know that Animas also do some work with some great partners as well. So that could be something that you could explore. Build your networks online as well. LinkedIn is a fantastic professional platform, but you've also got Instagram, social media. There's so many different groups that you might be able to start to think about joining or honing into that have an international landscape. There might be social media apps that don't operate here and operate more in other countries. I can't think of the name of them, but I know that there are some social media apps that are quite popular in other countries. That might be a way for you to join some of those and get familiar with some of those. So expand your scope and your networks. It was only through doing this that I was able to expand my niche working with leaders on a global scale. So I'm able to do that now by thinking broader rather than just thinking of the UK. And I am already working with leaders now across outside of England, which is really lovely for me as I develop my niche. Also ask for referrals. That helps as well. You know, referrals are your friend, and a lot of the work I've got has been through referrals. So the world is your oyster. Okay. I know that we're over time, so just bear with me very quickly. I just want to touch on a couple of other points just as we come to an end of this hour, which has gone so quickly. So as we come to the end of this talk, I'd like to leave you with just a couple of final thoughts. The first one is this. This quote really struck me. Diversity is a fact, but inclusion is a choice. And we make every day, sorry, as leaders. And we have to put out the message that we embrace and not just tolerate diversity. So I invite you to continue to build your cultural intelligence and become more inclusive in your practice. And finally, my very final thoughts that I'd like to leave you on is this. So back in 2018, I had an intention for myself. I said that by 2028, I wanted to start working with a particular organisation in the world of football as a coach. And it was one of those lofty goals where you would say to yourself, when I get there, that's going to be huge. When I arrive there, I know I've made it. And this month in 2023, thanks for my international connections and my diverse portfolio of clients, this organisation is now working with me. So if there's one thing that I can say is self-belief is key to your success. Be courageous, think big, embrace opportunities, especially the ones that feel uncomfortable. Set an intention for yourself. You know, I invite you to send a postcard from your future self to today. You know, who are you working with? What are you doing? Create that intention. Coaching is one of the most rewarding jobs in the world, and you have the skills to make a difference on a global scale. So go and be great. I hope this was useful. Thank you so much for your time this evening. I am just going to share my contact details. Please do, for anyone that isn't connected with me. I'm on Instagram, and I mainly use Instagram, so I'm at Nisha Vyas Coaching, and I'm also on LinkedIn as well. But you could also email me. Feel free to email me, and I am going to shortly open up the Q&A for anyone that has any questions, but I'm conscious that some of you may need to leave now. So if you do, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for your time. I know it's so valuable, and thank you for being here. But before we open up the Q&A, as I say, I appreciate some of you might need to leave, and I'm just going to share a quick link because, as you know, this talk is certified as a CPD, and Animas will provide a digital certificate for everyone that has attended live. So to claim that, please do complete this form. Bear with me one moment. Oops, everyone. There we go. Okay, so hopefully you can access that in the chat, but please do click that link. If you do have any issues with the link, just drop us an email, we'll support you, and then by tomorrow you should have that CPD. So thank you so much again to everyone for being here.